Alright, today we're going to talk a little bit about Wah Wah inductors and modifications you can make to your Wah Wah pedal. There's a lot of information out on the internet about all this stuff. I just wanted to share with you some of the things that I've discovered along the way, such as, red versus yellow phasal inductors, halo versus phasal inductors. Because your inductor is going to make the biggest difference in your sound. Of course, you got the vocal mod, which is the resistor on the side of the inductor, and you have a lot of mods. You can change resistors and capacitors fairly easily. But what I wanted to talk about was the engine of the Wah Wah, which is your inductor. Mammoth Electronics has released this ME6. I have one around here somewhere. I've used several of these in builds. They sound pretty good. So I want to share that, this part with you first, so that you guys can see the ME6, and then we're going to dive into some of the other more common Wah Wah upgrades, such as the red phasal, which makes a difference. Not a dramatic difference, but it makes a good difference in the sound of your Wah Wah. The main thing that people get confused, however, is that not all inductors are wired the same. I mean, we're talking about winding a coil, just like a guitar pickup, in a way. But not, these are mass produced, so not all of them are going to be the same. A lot of people think, oh, I can throw a red phasal in my Crybaby, and it's going to sound exactly the same as my friend's Crybaby with the red phasal. Not necessarily true. I would actually encourage you guys to consider winding your own inductor if that's a possibility. Anyway, enough said there. I'm going to go into this now, and we're going to show you the Mammoth ME6 Wah inductor. You can see it here. It's $8, which is actually a lot better than buying a phasal inductor. If you go on to eBay and you find a red phasal inductor, you're going to spend closer to $15, $20. Okay, so let's go back here and roll this.
Okay, so basically installing the ME6 inductor is pretty easy. I'm going to show you 3 different kinds of wahs that it can go in. These aren't the only 3, but these are some of the most common ones. So here we have a new Vox wah, just kind of the standard. I think it's the V847A. So we're going to begin by just take out the old inductor, so just desolder the 4 legs here. Just comes out like that, and then since the ME6 only has 2 legs,
you only
all
need
you need
2
to
legs,
do, so there's the symbol where it needs to be connected.
I believe the other ones were made.
So you just need.
A lot of you guys probably already know this, but the older 4-prong inductors really only need 2 prongs. It's a coil. You have you've got a wire that's wound around a magnet, basically. I think the 4 posts were there to anchor it better to the board. The problem is, what I see is separation of the coil winding. You see separation from the coil winding to the leg of the inductor, and I see that a lot. If your wah wah is acting like a volume pedal, pop that inductor out and just test it for continuity. See if your meter will beep when you put both your leads onto these points, and if it beeps, it's a good inductor. That's kind of the way I test them. Yeah, I don't bother with measuring them anymore. I just test them for continuity. If they have good continuity, you're probably good. If your meter doesn't beep, that's where you're going to have to look closely and see if the winding has come undone from one of these legs. Anyway, just a little bit of advice there on that note.
Need those two legs to go in those two holes, which ended up being these two closer to the middle. And we'll just solder these in here.
This has all been sped up, obviously.
And there you go, you're done on the Vox. So now we're going to take an older Vox, just has a little different board, and the inductor's already been removed on this one. So basically you can see that there's two big inductor traces. So this one goes around that way, this one comes around that way. So you just need one of the legs to go in this side somewhere, one of the legs to go in that side somewhere. So we'll just take it and we'll pick these two, and it just drops right in. So I've got it. Got that leg connected to that side, that leg connected to this side, and we'll solder it in. And so you're done there on that one. That's kind of what it looks like installed. And finally, we have Crybaby here. It's a new Crybaby. It's got a red phasal in it. And so we'll just take that red phasal out. And kind of the same thing with the Vox. Here's one trace, then here is the other trace. So you just need a leg to go one on this side, one on this side, just however you can fit it in. Let's see, should just drop right in. That. I've got one leg on this trace, one leg on that trace. That's kind of what it looks like installed. So you're basically done. So let's have Grant show us what this sounds like installed in a Crybaby. So that's the new ME6 Wah inductor from Mammoth Electronics.
By the way, the sound demo on this totally fucking sucks. I don't know why they used him or why they used a goddamn Telecaster for that matter. Once again, when you're doing sound review, guys, videos, you know, come on, guys. You might want to consider not using a fucking Telecaster when you do a sound review. It's not the gold standard. It has its own compressed, quacky sound to it that fucks with everything, and I don't understand why people use them in sound reviews. I think it's a lack of judgment, especially coming from people who should know sound. However, this part does sound good. I've used them in several Wah Wahs. Don't use this video as an example of its sound, because it sounds a lot better than this, okay? Especially when you modify the pedal to a higher, like in the Clyde McCoy, that resistor next to the inductor is sometimes a 100K resistor and sometimes it's a 68K resistor. In your stock Crybaby, that's going to be a 33K resistor. So modify that resistor first. Take that guy up to, because that resistor is kind of dependent on what inductor you have. That's your resistor that drives the engine of, you know, the inductor. So you have to play with that value. Maybe even put a trim pot in place of that resistor so that you can dial that into exactly where you want it. I would suggest like a 200K trim pot or maybe even just a 100K trim pot, so you can dial in that magic sweet spot, which is going to be between, I would say between 40K and 68K. Some people would argue and say that it goes past 68K, it goes up into the 80K range. It's all dependent on what sound you want. Also, with a larger MH on your inductor, like this guy is a 500. Let me go back and check. I don't want to misquote. Okay, so this is 570. Let's see here. You can see here, this is 570 mH. Now your typical inductor in a Wah Wah pedal is going to be around 500 mH. So you're adding a little bit, not a lot. What this means to me in terms of sound, however, is if I'm playing with distortion, it's going to sound a little bit better than a lower output inductor, for example. If you're playing clean, that might not be your cup of tea. You know, it's all to your ear. Everybody has their own opinions about a lot of this shit, and it's all to your own ear. It's what you want to hear. It's not what I want to hear. I tend to like more of the vintage stuff. I tend to make Wah Wah pedals sound as close as I can to this guy, which is the Clyde McCoy. This is a Clyde Deluxe. What I wanted to show you though is this. See this? This guy's your inductor in a Clyde, and this is where people think, oh, I'm gonna put a red phasal in my Crybaby, and I'm gonna modify my Crybaby to Clyde McCoy spec, and it's gonna sound like a Clyde. It's not gonna sound like a Clyde because you don't have this film can inductor. And you know, a lot of people say, oh, I can just wind my own and blah blah blah. Well, these have weird magnetic characteristics to them, so for whatever reason it's kind of a secret sauce component. And if you try to find one of these, they're not cheap either. I mean, they charge a bundle for some of these boutique inductors. I think a lot of that is horseshit, but that's just the way the game is played. You know, once again, your film can inductor is going to make a big difference in your tone, but it's not like it's going to be this huge fucking difference that you just love the Clyde so much more than, you know. That's just my opinion. Here we can see the phasal and a toroidal inductor. Not a huge fan of the Vox pedals. They're okay. I just think they sound a little bit trebly to my ear. I always bass modify them. You know, your mids and your bass on your Voxes are... Okay, so... we used to be able to get the stack of dimes. I don't know, you know, comment in the comments if it's true, if we can still get the stack of dimes from, I think it was Small Bear Electronics used to sell the stack of dimes inductors, and those are pretty good. I remember a lot of people using those back in the day and people being pretty happy with them. The yellow phasal, just avoid it. You know, the reason I say avoid the yellow phasal, it makes the most dramatic difference. However, look at it this way. Dunlop does not install the yellow phasal in any of their production pedals. And there's a reason. It doesn't sound that good. If the yellow phasal was fantastic, they'd be putting it in their production units. They'd be installing them in production pedals because they would satisfy pedal buyers, which is the main thing, and they don't. So if you're gonna go with a red, or you're confused, do I go with the red or do I go with the yellow phasal? Just go with the red. There's no in my book there's no difference, you know, or there's no question. Some people argue with me and say, I love my yellow phasal. Well, good for you. That's your tone. You love it. But most of us don't want the yellow phasal tone. Most of us put that in there and go, this is kind of wackadoo and messy. which is probably what the vintage pedals sounded like more, you know. Then you got the TDK rectangular. I can't find those anymore. I found one a long time ago, and they wanted way too much money for it. You know, I would choose the red. You know, they're saying, yeah, choose the red toroidal model for the cleanest sound possible, or for the diehard vintage vibe, install the yellow authentic cup core version. Whatever. Okay, the you know, he's right. It's the, I guess it is the diehard vintage wah wah sound. I don't like it. It's not my preference. It's not what we hear in a lot of our music either. You know, for the most part, you're hearing either a halo inductor, a red phasal. You know, you're hearing the most common ones. I mean, it's not like guys go out on a limb to do this shit for the most part. But for $8, my point is, for $8, why not try the Mammoth ME6? Throw that in the, you know, for a long time, the way I would build pedals, you know, I'll find a picture of that. I've got it somewhere. Anyway, for a long time, I would build pedals with 2 inductors in the pedal because I wasn't satisfied with just having the one. That is, if I can find the fucking pictures of it, because God, my eyes suck. Where the hell did I put that folder? Sorry guys, hold on a second. Okay, so here's a picture of it. This is the ME6, the one I was just telling you about. And here's your toroidal. This one's a little weird because it doesn't have a little cage around it. I think it was an older Crybaby, but this is your typical toroidal Crybaby inductor that comes with, you know, your Crybaby stock. So what I did was I put them both on a PCB, and I put a dip switch setup. That's what this is. It's called a dip switch setup. And you can see this goes from 1 to 6. So I could have had a longer board here and installed 6 of these if I wanted to, but that's getting a little crazy. A lot of times guys will decide not to do it this way, which I don't blame you. You know, the other way is kind of a smarter way of doing it, and installing the switch on the outside. However, you know, I built this pedal for me, and I knew that I would pick one or the other, and guess what? I picked this one over this one. You know. The other cool thing, too, is you can turn them both on at the same time with this dip switch setup, and you can't do that with, when you do it with just the, you know, well, you could do it with just toggle switches, but most people wouldn't wire it that way. They'd wire it for one or the other. You know, I really like this option of being able to do this. And then, of course, not throw away the stock part, so that you can still go back to the stock sound if you want to. But, you know, you'll probably end up keeping the ME6 in there. Now, the other cool thing about Mammoth is I've damaged one of these, or 2 of these, and they've sent me replacements. They've been really cool about that. Kudos to Mammoth for being cool about it. Let's go through here a little bit. Here's another picture of this setup so you guys can kind of see how this is, you know. You got your grounds from both going back, and then I've got my positive connection from both of these going back to the PCB right here. And it looks like I've changed that side resistor once again, probably to a 68K carbon comp. You don't have to use carbon comp resistors. It's kind of a silly boutique thing. You know, the other thing I did with this pedal is I converted it to true bypass, and you can see that over here. I ripped out the regular switch and converted it to true bypass. Okay. Here's another picture of that, so you can kind of see the mod. I think the buffer is removed on this pedal too, which is another thing you guys should look up, is look up removing the buffer on them, blah blah blah. Both of these caps I think I replaced. This is the 4.7 UF. A lot of times, if you have a wah wah pedal that wants to act like a volume pedal, it's going to be either a problem with your inductor or this capacitor right here, and that's your 4.7 UF. I think it's a 4.7 in both the Vox and the Dunlop. This is a crybaby right here, but I think it's the same in both. Again, if you have a wah wah pedal that's acting like a volume pedal, you're going to want to replace this one first, this capacitor, which, don't get me wrong, I mean, nothing should go wrong with it, but more often than not, I've found a problem either with the traces to the inductor. Now that's going to be on the, if you took this board and flipped it over the other way, you could see the traces on the back side of the board, and it'll be a cracked trace on the back side of this board, or it'll be the actual inductor itself. Again, pop the inductor out of the circuit, you have to, and then test it for continuity. See if your meter beeps at you when you press against both contacts. But make sure that the two contacts that you press the meter against, or that you put your contacts against, are the windings. You'll see the copper wire going off to the leg at each one of those legs. Because you're basically testing the winding for continuity. A lot of times I see a break right about here where the wire's coming out of the coil and then into the leg. I don't know what happens. Maybe it's because guys are rough with their gear and they throw around that wah wah pedal in the pedal bag or whatever. Or it's, the wah wah pedal is kind of one of the pedals you don't care about getting scut. That was a good one. All right, guys.